Well, cool. Welcome to the Equip and Connect. And the topic today is reimagining local missions through listening. Um, I'm gonna start by telling you a little bit about my story in local missions and what that has meant to me, what my journey has kind of looked like within local missions and community engagement, and tell you a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk about um, the work of community listening. Um, I uh, have um, in my various roles, so I've been a associate pastor at Boone United Methodist Church. I had several roles there over 12 years. And then one of those was missions director. Another was I pastored a network of Fresh Expressions. That was a campus of Boone UMC. And I was also a worship leader. And then uh, after that, was asked to work at the conference office. Did that for 7 years as the associate director of church development, which is now called Reimagining Congregations, and helped churches around the conference to start fresh expressions and think through innovation and community engagement in new ways. And then just a few weeks ago, July 1, started as the pastor of Huntersville United Methodist Church, the lead pastor. And so I've been in the thick of it for 5 weeks now, drinking from the fire hose and learning everything. The timing this week is good. My associate pastor's preaching this week, so I have a new lease on life this week, not having to write my sermon. Um, but I'm really enjoying it and enjoying learning about how this church serves its community, connects with its community, and does local missions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my story and starting back in Boone. So I was a college student at App State. I didn't grow up United Methodist, got connected with the UMC through the Wesley Foundation, the campus ministry of the UMC at App State, and just really fell in love with the ministry, the people, and the theology, the stories of John Wesley. It just really resonated, and I found myself in a finding a new spiritual home there. And then I connected as a sophomore at Boone United Methodist Church. They were starting a new service on Sunday mornings, a contemporary service in the gym, and I was the first worship leader for this new service. And at the same time, while I was leading worship on Sunday morning and really enjoying that ministry, enjoying the preparing for Sunday morning with a pastor who was preaching at the church. We would meet together every week and was really starting to develop a pastoral heart for the people on Sunday mornings. Um, and while that was happening, I was also studying social work. So as a college student, looked at sociology for a little while, but landed on social work as my major. And so I was taking classes on social problems, on how to intervene in and support people who are going through difficult situations, research-based interventions, interviewing skills, all these different things that I was learning about. Um, but particularly that learning of social problems and then doing some internships with local nonprofits really awoke in me uh, my the scales kind of fell off of my eyes of just um, how much poverty, how much um, systemic oppression that neighbors just down the road were experiencing. Boone is in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. Some of y'all might call it Appalachian Mountains, but uh, the the town of Boone itself um, was a pretty vital college town, but if you just drove right outside of town, you got into rural Appalachian mountain generational poverty. And I saw some really difficult things. People who were living in homes that were just not safe. Uh, People with children who didn't have running water, um, all kinds of just, yeah, really hard things. And so my eyes just started getting open to that. And so the words of Amos 5 really started getting at me, where the prophet Amos says, "Away with the noise of your cymbals, but let justice roll down like a river." That's the Luke Edwards version of the scripture. Not a perfect quote, but that idea of throughout Amos of the people of God being really good at the worship thing, being really good at the Sunday morning ritual, if you will, and yet justice wasn't flowing from that. It was coming to God empty. The worship was coming to God empty. And so that really convicted me. I started to ask things about Bunyam C, like what are the things that we're doing for our neighbors? What does local missions look like? And at the time, we had a budget that supported nonprofits. We volunteered at um, a homeless shelter regularly. We did Habitat for Humanity. And to me, as a, a, a young 19-year-old or 20-year-old, I felt like we could be doing more. And so I talked to the pastor about what would it look like for us to beef up our local missions. And so from there, we did a listening process, a needs assessment, where we interviewed social workers and nonprofit executive directors, different people, and asked them what are some of the biggest needs you see in the community and what are some of the gaps in serving those needs. And so we did those interviewing for a month or so. And out of that, a few ministries emerged. We did a firewood ministry where we delivered firewood to folks. We did a home repair ministry where you see a picture here of repairing a mobile home. We gleaned at the farmers market and did a community garden at the church to add fresh produce to different food pantries in town, different things like that. We started to visit shut-ins um, and so out of that work, after I graduated from college, I was then hired on as the missions director and continued those ministries, also helped with our international missions at the church. And I was doing that for a year or two as my basically full-time job. Um, when I started to have a kind of crisis of identity in my ministry and my calling. Um, I had learned about the concept of empowerment, of Christian community development. I started attending conferences hosted by the CCDA, Christian Community Development Association, and different models of empowering forms of local missions, and began to see how when local missions wasn't done well, it could cause harm to the people that we were trying to help. Um, and that began to kind of wear on me. Um, I was uh, hoping for a more holistic um, intervention with our neighbors to walk alongside our neighbors and empower them through their difficult situations, and found that most of the time we were kind of uh, there was an us versus them dynamic that was forming of the kind of um, and I saw it in myself too, a bit of a savior complex developing of um, my job is to solve everyone else's problems and that's what God wants me to do and that just began to really start cracking. Um, that it felt like there was something more that God was inviting me to do, but I didn't really know what that looked like. So I was asked by the senior pastor after 2 years of doing that if I'd be willing to start a new campus of the church in downtown Boone. And I told him about um, kind of this thought process I was going through and how I really was still passionate about connecting with neighbors, with people that were beyond the church in our community, but that the giving stuff, the fixing things, um, just didn't feel like the whole picture. And so out of that, we created a network of fresh expressions over the next 6 years. We called it King Street Church. And in that, we ended up having a gathering at the homeless shelter every Monday evening. We had a gathering at the county jail every Wednesday morning. We met in a coffee shop near the homeless shelter for a morning devotion every weekday morning. We would read a psalm and talk about it for a little bit and pray together. Um, and then we started lots of other groups too. We had a group that met at the Boone Saloon on Sunday nights with kind of younger millennials at the time. We had a college student group, a single moms group, different groups like that. And in that, um, being present at the county jail every week and being present at the homeless shelter every week ended up creating and being involved in spiritual community with people who were in some of their toughest places that they'd ever been. Um, people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing incarceration. Um, and so these were the people that I was hoping that we would connect with as a missions pastor. But this time when I was connecting with them, it was a much more holistic connection. As opposed to giving them something physical, uh, we were sharing the word together. We were sharing um, our prayer requests with one another and praying for one another. Um, my mom went through breast cancer at the time, and the men of the Watauga County Jail were the most faithful prayers for my mom, and she loved that. And she's 5 years cancer free, probably rounding six soon. So yeah, it was a very different experience of connecting with our neighbors whose backs were against the wall, our neighbors who were experiencing trauma and who were um, uh, caught in addiction, who were um, just really struggling. And so what was interesting was by building spiritual community, particularly among folks who had been incarcerated that were getting out of incarceration, we began to discern what it would look like for us to advocate for um, a for our folks getting out of incarceration to find employment, to find housing, to educate people about the various challenges facing folks getting out of incarceration and how hard it is to start over after incarceration, how many walls are um, standing in their way. And so we started something as a network of fresh expressions called Incarceration Month. And it was a month-long advocacy series. We do it in the month of October. And in that, we would have awareness events. So we might do an event on the death penalty or on um, solitary confinement or on women in incarceration and the specific issues that they face on the banning the box initiative that um, tries to give folks a better chance of getting interviewed for a job by not having a box to have to check. Um, the background check, of course, would still find things, but the by getting rid of that box that gave the people an opportunity to explain their past. Different things like that. We did those, and then we did some fundraisers. So the local nonprofit that handled bill assistance, they set up a specific fund for folks getting out of incarceration, and we fundraised for that to help people with first month's rent or a cell phone to help get them a job, different things like that. And so we did some different fundraisers. We had a coffee blend with one of the coffee shops in town called the Second Chance Blend. We did a yearly concert where musicians in Boone would do Johnny Cash cover songs. We called it Cash for Convicts. It's kind of a provocative title on purpose, but yeah, it's this idea of raising awareness. And when I reflect on those 2 seasons of ministry and why I'm kind of telling you this long story at the beginning, um, is that when we approached our neighbors as whole people, as not just people whose uh, needs we're meeting, but as people who are complicated, people who not just had physical needs, but had spiritual longings, had dreams, had skills and gifts, and great senses of humor and personalities, and joy and richness to them. When we approach people that way, we actually had a larger and more lasting missional impact on our community. One of the things that eventually developed was a initiative through the Watauga County Sheriff's Department on intervening with folks in addiction and mental health issues, so that they might not get arrested if they qualify. They might get to go to treatment instead. So just reflecting on those 2 seasons, one had a much longer and lasting impact and a more holistic impact. Um, and I don't think that when I look back at those 2 seasons, is one right over the other? I don't think so. But I do think there is uh, in me a cause to reflect on that and to think about how can we approach local missions in a more holistic way. And I think in my work across the conference over the past 7 years, I did see many churches who conflated local missions with meeting physical needs. And again, I think that's part of it. Huntersville UMC, where I'm a pastor now, we have a food pantry that feeds 2,000 people a year, and it is important work. The folks that come in for food, I've been meeting them, and a lot of them are children. A lot of them are elderly. A lot of them are um, people who are caring for aging parents. It's important work, and it is something that the church should be doing. But I do think that God's mission is greater than meeting needs. And so, just a couple of famous missions theologians digging back to my seminary days of mission class. Bosch is a big one, and he teaches that mission is participation in God's movement toward the world, and that phrase Missio Dei is one that you'll hear in the missions world, where God has a mission, and the church is an instrument of that mission. So we look for ways to participate in that mission. And then Christopher J.H. Wright is another. His book on Missio Dei is widely read, and he thinks that says that mission is everything God is doing in God's purpose for all creation, and everything God calls us to do in cooperation with that purpose. So if we think about mission in that wider lens, local missions is not just about meeting physical needs. Um, it is a much more holistic thing. Um, it is m- connecting with people at a spiritual level. It's connecting with people at a social level. We're experiencing the loneliness epidemic and have for over a decade, where half of Americans are experiencing loneliness. I think local missions could mean addressing loneliness and creating social opportunities for engagement. I just think missions can get conflated with uh, giving stuff. And I think that that's to the church's detriment. I think our neighbors, as I mentioned, are so much more than needs to be met. Our neighbors are not houses to be flipped. They're friends to be enjoyed. They're children of God. They are made in the image of God and have gifts and dreams and passions and relationships, and they're complicated, just like you and I are. And so I think um, when it comes to reaching out to our local missions initiatives, I think we are called to engage with the whole person. And sometimes that will mean addressing physical needs, the food pantry, for example. Um, but often it'll mean connecting in other ways as well, the social, um, the the spiritual, the psychological, all these different aspects of who our neighbors are, and what their lives are like. Um, so, how do we do that? How do we think through reaching out to the whole person? How do we uh, help our local missions reflect a more holistic approach? And so, my argument today will be that we do that through listening. I've spent the last, I guess, 5 years writing about spiritual listening as a practice of community assessment, as a way of discerning church ministry. I did my doctoral work at United and wrote a dissertation on spiritual listening. And um, and what I found was throughout that story of my ministry, the part that I told you and the parts that I haven't told you about working at the conference office and helping churches, consulting with churches who are wanting to reach out, consulting with churches who felt isolated from their immediate neighbors. Um, the first step for all of that work, whether it was um, designing healthy local missions, whether it was starting fresh expressions of church, whether it was helping a church get unstuck, whether it was helping a church connect with its immediate neighbors. The first step kept being listening, listening well. And so I developed a listening process. As I mentioned, um, my first listening process that I engaged in was a needs assessment. And that is pretty common for churches that I've worked with, that when they have tried to do a community assessment, often they start by looking at needs. Um, I'm not sure why that is our instinct. It was certainly my instinct, and I've certainly seen it in a lot of different churches. Um, I wonder if there's a comfort level by, carrying something to our neighbors. It feels easier to approach our neighbors, something like that. Um, I wonder if it's when I would go on a work trip, I would bring my daughters a present home, like just to kind of say sorry that I was gone the last few days, or sorry I missed this connection with you. Here's something to kind of make it easier. I don't know if that's part of the dynamic, but I just have seen it over and over. And what I found when we started the network of fresh expressions, the gatherings at the homeless shelter in the county jail, I listened very differently that time when the senior pastor asked me to start a network of fresh expressions, or when he asked to start a campus downtown. I started by asking questions like, I would meet with people who were downtown, who um, were connecting with folks on the margins in Boone, and I would ask questions like, if I were to form a spiritual community that you would be interested in, what would it look like? Or tell me about your spiritual life, or what do you love about this community? What's something that you see missing? And I just started asking very different questions. I think by then I learned to ask more holistic questions, and it led to a more holistic ministry. And so I think reflecting on that, what we ask will influence what we hear, and what we hear will influence how we respond. So if we start our process of connecting with the community by asking good holistic questions, then good holistic ministry will emerge. If we start by asking um, too narrow questions, or questions that reduce our neighbors to their needs that need to be met, then that's the type of ministry that will emerge from that. And so I think asking good questions and listening well is the way to create holistic spiritual ministries and holistic ministries that address the whole person of your neighbors. And to do that, we have to ask those spiritual questions. We can't be afraid of that. Um, so I'm gonna just take a pause and a breath for a moment just to see if there's any questions so far before I jump into this process of listening um, that I've developed. Any questions or reflections? Cool. We'll keep plugging then. Um, and I'll leave some time at the end for I'm aiming to wrap us up at 1, so I'll leave some time at the end for our and in 30 minutes. I know Elizabeth, you're probably on a different time zone. All right. So what I found in listening to discern, reaching out, listening to develop local missions, listening to start new churches, I found there to be 3 parts to this listening. The first is listening to God in prayer and in conversation with God. The second was listening to your congregation. And the last part is listening to your neighbor. And we're going to focus in on the listening to your neighbor. So I'll probably jump through some of these slides fairly quickly. Um, but a guiding question of this process was what would it look like to do community assessment in a spiritual way? So I mentioned needs assessment as one model of community assessment, and I think is a fairly limited one. There are some better models of community assessment out there. There's um, uh, asset mapping from the asset-based community development world that's really good. Um, but what I found was in most of the resources I was finding, if not all, that they lacked a spiritual component. They were asking questions, they were assessing the different aspects of people, but they were missing the spiritual piece. And so in my work, I began to look at ethnography, which is the study of cultures, and as a process that anthropologists use to study cultures. And I found it really to be a powerful tool, set of tools. And then I asked, what would it look like to combine that ethnography with contemplative spirituality, the kind of inner work that we do in our relationship with God. And so out of that, a process called the Spiritual Listening Plan emerged. It's been downloaded over 1,000 times over the past 3 years. You can find it at thelisteningchurch.com and that QR code. Um, but the process breaks listening down into those 3 sections and has some activities that are it's a free listening plan. There's no cost. It's a kind of choose your own adventure. So there's 12 activities and then a closing discernment. But most churches pick a few from each or 1 or 2 from each, and out of that are able to discern. Some of them discern something new to start, something existing to adapt, something old to let go of. But uh, some scripture to kind of root our conversation today. Um, this is, I think it's Mark 10. I meant to put it, I just added this one for today. I meant to put I'm pretty sure it's Mark 10. Um, but it's one of the stories, and there's a few of them, where Jesus is approached by someone. And I think both of the stories that I found were people experiencing blindness. Um, and this one is Bartimaeus. He's shouting and shouting and shouting for Jesus. People are getting annoyed at him. And Jesus says, call him over. Um, and what Jesus says to Bartimaeus is, what do you want me to do for you? Um, and it, feels a little bit obvious. He's experiencing blindness. Jesus's reputation for healing, miraculous healing at this point. I think it's pretty obvious what he would want Jesus to do for him. But Jesus still asks. And I think there's some significance to that. Um, that often we reach out without ever asking, what do you want the church to do for you, or how can the church support you? Um, what would it look like for our church to be a better neighbor to you? And by asking those questions on the front end, and we can design ministries that our neighbors are actually looking for. Um, I think one of the important pieces of listening and of local missions is that it's rooted in love, love for God and love for our neighbor. And that when we root our local missions in love, um, that will help us create healthier ministries. Um, when our local missions is rooted in, numbers, trying to really impress people, or it's rooted in a savior complex, like I experienced for a while, um, that will lead to really unhealthy ministry and unhealthy relationships with our neighbors. But when we root our ministry in love, healthy ministry follows, and uh, just find that there's a clear connection between listening and loving. Can't love my wife very well if I don't listen to her. Can't love my friends well if I don't listen to them, if I'm always the one talking. So I think that listening piece is just really important. Um, I'm going to skip some of this just to make sure we have enough time. Um, so a few other building blocks of this listening process then would be curiosity, just being um, having a curiousness to learn about our neighbors. Again, to learn about them as whole people, um, and to ask good questions, and to just realize that our neighbors are exciting to get to know. That that the relationship that we can build can be enriching to our lives. And so we get to be curious and to learn people's stories and to hear their experiences with life and how they have approached God and their spiritual lives. All these different things are really rewarding. It requires us to pay attention to our neighbors, to go out and to be in a proximity with people. Um, one of our We had an intern who wanted to help us with our homeless uh, or our group that met at the homeless shelter, and so I invited him to take a month to listen for his first month as an intern, and he would sit in the parking lot outside of the homeless shelter where people were congregating, and then he found out that a lot of people were congregating at the Walmart parking lot as well. There was a spot at the bus stop that the police wouldn't chase people away, so they would uh, folks experiencing homelessness would end up sitting there on nice weather days. So he started going there as well. And out of those, he said it was awkward sometimes, but people really started opening up to him and building relationship with him, and he started getting to know them, and they got to know him. Um, I was at the shelter one Monday night when we would eat dinner together and or eat dinner at the shelter before our group met, and a lady came up to Dustin and said, "Hey, Dustin, I really wanted to talk to you about something. Can I meet you at the Walmart parking lot tomorrow?" He said, "Sure." So it kind of became his like field office. But that proximity, I think, is really, really important. We have to get out of our comfort zone. At the conference office, part of my job was the mission insight reports. And those are super helpful. They really open up a lot of demographics to your community, um, but they're not a substitute for getting out in the community and talking to real people. And then lastly, that openness, being willing to hear things that will change how we approach ministry, being open to um, creating ministries that we didn't think we would create, or letting go of ministries that aren't helpful, having that openness. Um, I will say that listening has also been shown to be um, the an excellent way for people to for the church to connect with people outside of the church and on a spiritual level. So when this is a study by Barna. When people imagine a Christian they'd be interested in learning from, these are people that are not connected to a faith. They asked, what would a Christian that you would be interested in learning from, what would what characteristics would you use to describe them? And listens without judgment was the first thing. And when they asked the same group um, who they know as a Christian who's talked to them about their faith and they had a positive experience with them, the four of the top things were they listened well to you, they asked you questions, and they displayed curiosity. So that um, that study really says that if we want to do evangelism well, if we want to reach out well, an absolutely essential skill for that is listening. So that first piece of the three parts of listening is listening to God. Um, I'm gonna keep moving just because of time, but I will just tell this one Thurman story. So Howard Thurman says that or talked about walking down a street in Rochester, New York, late at night, and it was a street he had walked a million times, but he never walked it at night. And as he was walking over this street, he realized that there was water flowing underneath it. That the Erie Canal, part of the Erie Canal, flowed under this road. And he had only walked it during the day when it was loud and noisy and there's cars and trains and people, and so he could never hear it. And so he talks about just finding that quietness to find and to listen to the God who's always there. The water was always flowing under that street. He just didn't know it. And so when we enter into that quiet place, then Thurman was able to see what God was doing, see God's mission in the world, if you will. And he was able to see how um, Thurman, was able to join in that. So I do think, yeah, that listening to God piece is really essential. And then I think an important part of forming local missions, of reevaluating local missions in your church, would be to listen to your congregation as well. Um, and in that, we're looking at what are the gifts, the values, the passions of the church. Um, what what is the desired future of the congregation? Who do we want to be? What are our dreams? And trying to discern what God's nudges to the church are. Um, the scout mindset is simply an idea of being open um, to things that challenge us, to not having preconceived notion, um, but to really be open to what we hear. Um, I've seen some churches that I've worked with through the listening plan um, that have polled their congregation using note cards on Sunday mornings and asking them questions, good questions. One that might be particularly um, helpful for a local mission initiative would be, with whom is God calling us to focus our outreach ministry? And just seeing what your church members say could be really interesting. Um, I'm going to jump into listening to our neighbors because I think it's one that resonates with our topic most today. But so I mentioned that first approach of listening was a needs assessment, and then what I found was and when I went to study my neighbor's needs, I just didn't learn about the whole person of my neighbors. And so I found that culture is a better um, topic to, or a better word for what we are assessing when we want to reach out to our neighbors, um, to understand the culture of our church, our people in our church, and the culture of our community. And cultures are just the way of life that people have, the behaviors, beliefs, the rituals, the values, the symbols, the things that we have that we don't think about until we're in another culture and it feels weird or different. It's not weird or different. It's just a different, or it is different. It's just a different culture. Um, and so to do cultural assessment, I looked at ethnographic techniques. So these are the ways that anthropologists study cultures. And the first one's participant observation. They go to the group they want to learn about and they participate in uh, their community. So it's not standing on the edge with a clipboard. It's really going in and jumping in and being a part of that community and participating. Um, I, I've done that playing soccer at the community pickup soccer game. Did that at the homeless shelter by eating dinner there every week. That participation changes the perspective of the observation that you make. The next piece is then interviewing, is asking good questions of the people that you want to learn from. I think open-ended questions are important. Um, and thinking about question asking as kind of a archaeology of when someone says something interesting, to ask them to tell me more about that, or I would love to hear more about what you just said, different things like that. Some of the questions that I've found helpful for um, this listening process. Uh, so one, just kind of more general questions, telling you about yourself. What are your passions? What brought you to the community? Where do you like to spend your time in the community? And then this next one's intentional in the order. What do you love about this community, and what would you change about this community? So um, if we lead with what, like I did that first time with what are the needs of the community, then that sets a very different tone for the conversation than if I say, what do you love about this community? And then after a few minutes of talking about that, is there anything you would change about it? That really sets a different conversation. It still is, I think, important to ask what people see as needs for change, but it just sets a different tone. It's strengths based as opposed to needs based. Um, and then I think it's really important to ask spiritual questions. And Americans are spiritual. There are very few Americans who are not at all spiritual. And so asking a question like, how would you describe your spiritual life? Um, is not as scary as it sounds. You know, I've asked a lot of people that question, and if someone is not spiritual, they'll just say, I'm not spiritual. And then you move on to something else. It's not a threatening question. Um, and so what's amazing is that so many people have an answer to that. You know, I love Krista Tippett's podcast on being, used to be an NPR show. But she always asks, tell me about your spiritual heritage or something like that, and what your spiritual life was like growing up. And people might describe church or synagogue or temple, or they might describe going for hikes and being in awe of the butterflies. You know, people have answers to spiritual questions. And I think those types of questions are going to allow you to really understand your neighbors and their spiritual longings, as well as the other aspects of them. And then the last piece is archival research. You can read things online about the people that you're hoping to reach out to. So we bring all those pieces together. We listen to God, we listen to our congregation, we listen to our neighbor, and then we, out of that, are able to discern um, what God's inviting us to do next, how God's inviting us to engage with our community outside of the walls of the church. So just a quick example from my life after Boone. So in Boone, I was in the pubs and the jails and the homeless shelter. And then when I got to the suburbs of Charlotte, I had a 1.5-year-old. I worked in the conference office, and so my context moved from the pub and the jail to the playground. And so I would find myself at the playground a lot with my daughter. That's her on the left, Mary Frances, the older one, and then eventually my second daughter, Anne Marie. And at the playground, I did a lot of listening. Met parents of other children that were playing. Got into good conversations. My wife is super extroverted, so she would meet a mom, and she'd get her phone number, and then we'd all get together for dinner, and just got to know a lot of families in this little subdivision. It was the pandemic, and so our bubble was pretty small, and so that playground was a place that we were able to connect with a lot of people. And after a year of maybe, yeah, I think right about a year of listening at the playground, I had some playground findings. So the first one was that I saw more dads on Saturdays. I think some of them were giving the moms a break. I think some of them had custody on weekends. And those dads that did have custody on the weekends, they were looking for fun things to do with their kids, um, to have really good quality time with their children. Um, I also noticed the crisis of male friendship was real. You know, this was I read widely sociology and different articles from that bounce around or about sociological phenomenon, and uh, a kind of subset of the loneliness epidemic is the friendship decline in America. We have a lot less friends than we did in 1990, and men are at the top of that friendship decline. And I saw it at the playground as I met men who, when I got to know them, didn't really have friends outside of work, or they worked from home and didn't really have in-person relationships with other men. And so that crisis of male friendship was real. Sorry. Um, and then the last one was this was a personal reflection, but being a dad of young kids was really hard. But it was not quite as hard as being a mom of young kids. So I wasn't going to get any sympathy from my wife. And so I needed some dad support. And so out of those findings, I had heard about this group in England that was called Who Let the Dads Out. And I thought that sounds perfect. And so me and a few friends, a few neighbors from the neighborhood, some people from the UMC church down the road. We started a group called Who Let the Dads Out, and it was dads and father figures and their kids, and we'd do something fun every other month. This was our kickball game, the dads versus kids kickball. We did a hike, fishing, lots of outdoor stuff because the pandemic was still kind of trailing off. Um, but yeah, it was a way of us building relationships, building community, for us pouring into our children kind of getting to see dads at work. We never ate a vegetable together. We always ate hot dogs and soda and different things like that. And we had a really good time. So that's an example. I'm going to stop sharing just so we can have a little bit of Q&A time. Um, but yeah, what questions do you have about this process of listening and how it can lead to new types of local missions?
Luke, you shared some fantastic information. And I'm excited to check out the listeningchurch.com and see what's there and see if maybe there are ways I can connect it in other places. I think about how sometimes when we're in these positions where we're thinking about ministry opportunities or how we can engage with our communities, sometimes we think of ourselves in a position of having the answers or having whatever, like if we can get to the point where we can meet needs and identify needs and like it kind of goes back to us being in a pit like it kind of creeps on that savior complex where you talked about it, like all of us, maybe not all of us, but we can have that tendency to lean into that. Um, and I think we recognize that ultimately at the end of the day, we come up short and that every time. Because just we need God. And we need each other, just like you said, we need each other. So through this listening process, are there ways that we can kind of safeguard ourselves from tending towards that these thoughts of we have the answers, we know it's best, and I guess recognize our shared humanity and need for each other and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really can be really challenging. I think it um, probably requires a team that's committed to that kind of humility and can kind of check each other. I think that's probably part of it. I think the taking plenty of time on the front end of ministry to reflect on our motivations. I think
Hmm.
sometimes we rush into the doing without thinking about the why. Um, why are we doing this? Why do I want to do this? What am I looking to get out of this? Like those types of questions, I think, um, yeah, I think are really important. And doing reflection after we do things too. Um, so often we, do a mission week or a service week or a mission trip, and um, we might do a prep call, but we uh, um, having that after reflection, I think helps too, or kind of ongoing reflection.
Yeah. Is that part of the listening church? Is that part of the, I don't know if you call it a program or what, but is that built in to that?
Yeah, it's not officially on that, but I have on my Substack have written about how listening is ongoing, and I do think some of the churches that have gone through it have found ways to incorporate it in an ongoing way. Like when they've done those note cards on Sunday mornings, like they were like, wow, this is great. Like we're gonna keep doing
Mhm.
this every once in a while. Um, so I do think it can. Um, there are some churches that just use the process and then they're done, and then there are other churches that really have become listening churches. I've seen a few of them that it just really gets into their DNA and is transformational.
Is it okay if I share it, Luke?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. I'm excited to dig into this ethnographic technique. And
Yeah.
yeah, need to think
Yeah.
about that
I
some
can
more.
send you my dissertation too if you're really brave.
Yeah.
Linwood, did you guys have some questions?
We're sitting here talking about it.
Yeah.
Send y'all a link to
The
that
link to
website.
theirs. Oh, okay, thanks.
Um, I have what I think is a much more basic question is how do you get started listening to the community?
Mhm.
How do you get started? I mean, I saw you out on the playground and that makes sense. I mean, if you got a play,
If you got a
Yeah.
playground.
but we're I guess we're a slightly older congregation and we don't just go hang out at the playground. She's
Yeah.
pinching me, but
You don't have to just look at it.
Yeah. So I
but
think it's
but
a
really, how do you get started?
yeah.
I think we're all for everything you're talking about. But as a congregation, we don't have that experience, and I have to admit, as a pastor, this is all new to me because I've always thought in terms of, well, what can we do for the community? I know I've served churches that all they wanted to do was raise money and give it to missions.
Mhm.
And I talked to them about, no, we need to make more personal contact, not just give money away. And so how do we get started
Yeah.
making that
Yeah.
contact and listening to the community?
Yeah. I think part of it would be discerning like what are some questions that we want to ask. And who are the kind of people that we want to ask? You know, is it people that are not connected to church? Is it people that are from this particular neighborhood that's near our church? Is it people that are connected to this school that's across the street? Kind of giving it a little bit of direction on the front is helpful. Um, and one of the things that I suggest is I think you can start with a demographic report. I think those are helpful, but I think the interviewing piece is just really essential. And one of the things, because none of the people I ever meet are love knocking on doors. Um,
No, and I've been
yeah,
told that we don't want to do that.
yeah,
So
yeah. Nobody does. I've met one person in my like 5 years of talking about this that loves knocking on doors. And so something I learned in social work, in my research methods class, um, tell my parents that the money was worth it, but is called snowball interviewing. And so it's this idea where you have your set of questions. You say, "Hey, I'm Linwood, and my church is interested in learning from our neighbors. We've got a set of questions that we're asking people. Would you be willing to meet and talk about it?" And so, say you're focused on a neighborhood, and you know one person in that neighborhood. You start with them. You meet with them, you might get coffee or go for a walk or whatever that looks like, and you ask your questions. And at the end, you ask the question, who would be someone else that I should talk to, or who's someone else that I should talk to?
okay,
Who else do you know in this neighborhood that would be good for me to ask these questions to? And then they say, "Oh, my neighbor Bob wouldn't mind talking to you. Come talk to him, or here's his number." And then when you reach out to neighbor Bob, you get to say, "Hey Bob, I'm Linwood, and John gave me your number and said that you might be willing to talk to me." And so it's a way of kind of after a few of these people, you're all of a sudden way out of your circle of people that you've already known, and you didn't have to knock on a single door. So.
okay, that's it. I like that. That's helpful.
But yeah, I've worked with churches that have set a goal of interviewing 20 neighbors, and they learn a ton. I've worked with a church that tried to that did interviews and did focus groups, and they talked to over 100 neighbors, and they learned a ton. So there's lots of different ways to do it.
Attend a neighborhood meeting.
Okay. Okay.
Help us
What's that?
in the neighborhood. We could attend a neighborhood meeting. One actually meets here sometimes.
One of
Okay.
the churches that I was thinking about when I said that they're a real listening
A
church,
neighborhood
it's in
meeting
Ohio, and they
and
created a community
us out
survey,
and just sit.
and they put the link for it in the football flyer for the Friday night football game, and
Yeah.
had a gift card that you could win if you submitted
Yeah,
it. There's lots of really creative ways that you could do a tent at a community event and call it the listening booth and have a
absolutely.
question that you ask people when they come by. One church did that with like art, and they said like draw uh, your dream community or something like that. And just there's lots of creative ways people can do it.
Fall's coming up.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, Elizabeth, would you tell us a little bit about your work in our last time we came
Yeah, and
together?
I just want to throw in, as you're thinking about creative ways to engage your community, like it makes sense that you engage at the playground because you have a 1.5-year-old. And you also mentioned the loneliness epidemic that we're experiencing. And I think that sometimes we forget about our older people, maybe people that don't participate in our churches anymore. And I think that's always a great place to start, like just valued folks in our community that have a wealth of experience and want places to share that. But because sometimes they drop off the radar of church for whatever reason, they drop off of our radar. So I think, anyway,
Yeah,
I'm always cheering for listening to and incorporating our older adults in our community.
for sure.
That's just my own personal heart. But
Yeah.
so I work with the General Board of Global Ministries and the Board of Higher Education as a mission engagement liaison for the Southeastern jurisdiction. And before that, our family served as missionaries in Mozambique, Africa. So have that heart for mission and really appreciate the value of our denomination and how we bridge cultures and cross that, and how it positions us to receive the broader gifts of our global church. So my work is to essentially be a connector. I like to be in the spaces and places, hear what's going on, and look for ways to bridge those connections. So I work with Brian Mateer is kind of my direct contact for y'all's conference. Um, Also connect with the UMVM folks kind of in a side sort of way. I'm involved with creation justice movement. So, oh goodness. I just lost his name in Western North Carolina, Jonathan Brake.
Jonathan Break, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So have connection with those kinds of people. But yeah, I really appreciate our denomination's approach to mission, and that we try to value um, all of the gifts that we have together and recognize that need for each other. So I could go on, but I won't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth, and thanks Linwood and team, and for others that logged in, and for those that are watching the replay. It's just encourage y'all to yeah think about what listening might look like, how it might transform your local mission.